It's definitely recording. The red recording button's open.
Yeah, I see it now.
Welcome to episode 10 of Conflicts of Interest. I am the co-host Kyle Anslone. I'm joined by the other co-host Will Porter. Will, how's it going today?
Hey, Kyle, and everybody listening, how's it going?
Pretty well. We've had some tech issues, Will, so we're doing a take two here, but I think this time we'll be smooth sailing. People notice I got a different background on today's show. I'm not sure if the audio sounds different. I lost all my carpets and stuff too, so let me know how I sound and everything. But I am in the process of moving, so if the show schedule, day early, day late, or something like that in the next couple of weeks, make sure everybody is subscribed to the show somewhere. You're not just like counting on catching it on Facebook or something. So YouTube, there's a conflicts of interest channel. You get the video feed. But if not, iTunes, most places, conflicts of interest does have its own feed. If you're trying to listen on iHeartRadio, we don't have enough of a audio episode bank yet, so you still have to listen on the old Foreign Policy Focus feed. But make sure you subscribe. You'll get every episode, and then you follow us on Twitter or something. If we do have to change up the schedule, we'll definitely let you know there. With all that housekeeping stuff, Will, you ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So first thing up here is we had a really important person die over the weekend. And so, starting off there, everybody thinks, of course, I'm talking about RBG, but I'm not. I'm talking about Stephen F. Cohen, the renowned Russia professor who for decades now has, fought the fight to have a realistic Russia policy, a realistic take on Russia. So Professor Cohen was in his 80s when he passed, and I believe, at least for the about past year of his life, has been dealing with a pretty serious form of cancer. So, I don't think this was a sudden passing or anything like that, but nonetheless tragic for the anti-war movement, and of course, his friends and his family. His wife is, by the way, the great Christina Vandenhoel, who was formerly an editor at The Nation, and I believe still writes at The Washington Post, if she doesn't have a role at the Nation as well. So, well, I'll let you just give your kind of first thoughts on the important person who passed here.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen has been like a really needed and rational voice especially on the whole throughout this whole RussiaGate stuff the last couple of years, but also just in general on the Russia question, just on the issue that I think is the most important to you and I, and that is avoiding conflict with the world's second largest hydrogen bomb arsenal. So you can't really overstate the importance of that cause. And Stephen was a really important voice for that, I think. And it's unfortunate that we no longer have him in the debate, in the conversation. It's kind of a bummer. I actually tried to interview Stephen once, but he had too much going on. He's a really busy, intellectual and commentator and stuff. He was always traveling to Russia. He was always, writing, doing TV appearances and stuff. And I guess he was just a bit too busy at the time when I was trying to interview him for a story, but didn't work out. But yeah, it really is unfortunate to, I had no idea he was even in his 80s, just based on his level of activity and, how he looks and sounds. I did not realize he was, at that stage of age.
Yeah, certainly. There's this little clip of him debating Matt Booth that I'm actually going to stick in the show notes page, where it's definitely a post 2016 debate just based on the subject of it. But he absolutely owns Booth. It's fantastic. And so I will stick that in the show notes page. But in that, you look at him and he looks like he's an older man, but somebody that could be on the golf course every day, certainly. So yeah, right. Very, very spry into his elderly years there, and just doing important work. I'm also going to link to an article by Gilbert Doctorow, who worked with Stephen Cohen on the second iteration of the Committee for East-West Affairs, which does really important work on putting out just what's going on between the U.S. and Russia. They always have stuff like on New START, Open Skies, all the things, all the arms control that need to exist to keep us all from being vaporized in a nuclear war. That's exactly what they're covering all the time. And thankfully, we had Stephen Cohen for all these years to educate us and help us to keep up to date on all these crazy things going on. He's also done pretty regular shows on the John Batchelor show in the past, I think since 2016, really. like almost weekly or bi-weekly or something like that. So if anybody's interested, I mean, he has an amazing body of work, but those interviews were always really informative. His appearances on cable news, because hey, look, he's a distinguished professor, so they had to let this guy on TV, and he got to say some real things. I think he also did an interview with Aaron Mate in the past year and a half that was really good too. So there's a lot of work of his that you could find, but definitely check out some of it because he's a very important voice that unfortunately we no longer have.
Yeah, absolutely. And did we
So
want to get into? Do we want to mark another? There was another passing earlier this month that we wanted to, I think, get into. Kevin Zeese.
right. So unlike Professor Cohen, Kevin Zeese was a little bit more of an activist who did really important work, like staying in the Venezuelan embassy. After the U.S. recognized Juan Guaido as president, they said, "Oh, now it's your embassy." Well, that's not the way international law and stuff works. So a bunch of I'm pretty sure all left wing activists like Kevin Zeese got permission from the Venezuelan government to then go in the embassy, and they were there. And I think Kevin was one of the last people in there until the Secret Service came and rooted them out. He then spent, I think, like 6 months to a year in the middle of like a legal battle where they're trying to charge him with all kind of stuff. Of course, they eventually dropped the charges, I think, and he, doesn't face any legal repercussions. But this is a guy who wasn't, at a super advanced age. I think he was in his 60s and he died of a heart attack. Whenever I heard about it, I wonder all the extra stress that he went under the past year because of these, in a lot of ways, like fabricated charges. They were just trying to stick it to the guy who was sticking up for Maduro. Um, added to his stress level and potentially contributed to what happened. Although I'm sure Kevin understood the stress that came along with all the activism that he did throughout his life. I mean, he did a lot of stuff. Look at all the pictures people are sharing of him from after he died and stuff like that. He was just at like all these anti-war events all the time, and so while both of these men may not be like libertarian champions or anything like that, definitely important voices in the anti-war movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was most familiar with Kevin's work in terms of his like Venezuela activism. But if you look up, his career was a long one. He had all kinds of hand in fighting the drug war. He helped to found like 5 different, like important organizations in the fight against the drug war. I think he was affiliated with Normal, the marijuana legalization group. So he had a long, like, he was also a very prolific and busy activist and did a lot throughout his career. So, again, it's a real loss to no longer have him in the fight.
Yeah. In fact, at least while I've been working at antiwar.com, we pretty like at least once a month or so had a submission from him and Margaret Flowers, who run Popular Resistance, and
Yeah.
typically we ran those pretty good articles. A lot of them detailing Kevin's legal battle with the Venezuelan embassy fallout. So check out his archive at antiwar.com for at least that subject, but I'm sure a whole bunch of other great news. So we'll get away from some of the sad news and hopefully get into some, I don't know, interesting news. Keep people informed on what's going on here.
Get to some bad news.
Yeah.
Sad to bad.
All right. So the first story we got to talk about here is what's going on in Syria. Me and Will got some nice maps for people looking on the YouTube feed here. You can see that Syria is still looks like mostly Syrian government control. However, there's this big yellow chunk of map that was that east of the Euphrates River. That's almost all this orange color that represents, the U.S. government and our proxy forces, the SDF and the YPG. So why is the U.S. sticking more troops in Syria right now? What's happening?
Well, there's a little bit of mixed messages coming from the government about why they're doing this. But on Friday, I think what you're referring to is this military deployment. They sent like I think 6 Bradley fighting vehicles, which are like these small little tank type. It's not quite like an Abrams or something, but it's still basically a tank. It's a little more than an armored personnel carrier. And I think they sent like it was fewer than 100 soldiers to northeastern Syria. We don't know exactly where they're going to be operative, but you can see in this map here that is like, the region they were deployed to. That is primarily where the U.S. presence is in Syria right now, with the exception of a small little pocket in the south near the Al-Tanf area. However, in terms of like the reasoning, the rationale given for why they did this deployment on Friday, all of the official announcements are saying, they're mentioning ISIS and, ensuring the enduring defeat of the Islamic State and all this stuff. But interestingly, some officials went to NBC and CNN anonymously, military officials, and said that this deployment is meant to be a, quote, clear signal to Russia. And they mentioned something about, avoiding unprofessional actions and provocative behavior and all this stuff. So it does sound to me like that is actually the real intended goal here, is sending this message to Russia. And listeners might recall in a previous episode, we covered this thing a couple weeks ago, this scuffle between American and Russian vehicles doing patrols up in northeastern Syria in the same region, where you ended up having this collision between a Russian and American vehicle, and the Pentagon says that between 4 and 7 U.S. soldiers were injured in that. So it does actually seem like this very likely is a response to that incident and some other similar little scuffles we've had with the Russians lately. So there wasn't too much to this whole thing. The Pentagon didn't put out a ton of information about this deployment. We just got, it's going to be some Bradley fighting vehicles, and they're in northeastern Syria. But obviously this is a continuation of our occupation there. It's kind of ironic. Just a couple hours before this deployment, the president was bragging how we're out of Syria and how we we've mostly gotten out of Syria, and like apparently not, because we're still sending in soldiers and vehicles and stuff. This wasn't a huge deployment, but it's still just like, I want to see things going in the opposite direction, and that's the direction Trump keeps saying he wants to go in, is to pull out soldiers and vehicles, but he's still sending them in.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of the interesting thing that stood out to me about this story is you kind of had the worst of the false narratives from both the Republicans and the Democrats coming out here, like this idea that Trump is somehow anti-war and is trying to end the endless wars, and yet really everything he does made sure that they continue to go on. I mean, maybe something like, oh, Syria, you could say that since his, he escalated it in 2017, has wound it down some, down Iraq some, after a major escalation in the air war in Afghanistan has, since wound down that war a little bit. But for the most part, it's not like Donald Trump isn't carrying out a ton of military operations. And so, they have this whole narrative that he's somehow going to end the endless wars. And this is just another clear example of that not happening. Then you have the entirety of left-wing Twitter tweeting all day long about how the president's in the pocket of Vladimir Putin and how he's never confronted Russia. And yet we're still in Syria to confront Russia. And, they never really have to reckon with the fact that no matter how many times they claim that Donald Trump is a puppet of Vladimir Putin, he's, done things that are clearly aggressive towards Russia, and this is just the latest example. So I want to, kind of ask you, Will, is there any details on what this, like, I know you went over, like, some of the, how many people are going to be there, the deployments. Are they going to, like, try to prevent Russia from doing anything, or are they just, like, trying to say, hey, Russia, we would be willing to, step things up a little bit if you are?
Yeah, I kind of got the idea this is more just a show of force. Like, I don't think there's, they, like I said, they only sent like a dozen or so vehicles, fewer than 100 soldiers. So this isn't like a major escalation where they're, it's going to have like a real important outcome on the battlefield. But I do just think it's sort of like a show of force. Like, hey, we're beefing up our presence here a little bit. They said they'd also step up air patrols over the, northeastern region as well, in addition to the deployment. So I guess they're just kind of saying like, hey, Russia, like we're going to be a little more active in this area, so you better watch out. Because the Russians, of course, they also carry out patrols. That was what we saw with that footage, with that tense encounter between the American and Russian vehicles. They were both on patrols, and in that case, the Russians claimed that, hey, like we gave the Americans our patrol route, but the U.S. says that the Russians were like acting provocative and aggressive, and that they pursued them. And so there's some dispute over, how some of these things unfold. But nonetheless, I do think this deployment is just a matter of like, hey, like it's just a show of force, basically.
Right. Yeah, I read somewhere that it was supposed to last 90 days. And so I guess that the troops just go to some U.S. stronghold near the border with, Syria and Iraq, that they could not in any way really add to, at least on the ground, any tensions between the U.S. and Russia or Syria, then again, they could stick these soldiers at a checkpoint somewhere where maybe the Syrian government or the Russians are interested in having a checkpoint nearby. And I, could see it like adding to the tensions and, just things getting worse. So I guess the last thing I was wondering, I'm sure you don't have an answer to because we're talking about the thoughts of Donald Trump here, but coming to the election, in one sense, it seems like Donald Trump has this idea that what he needs to do is make foreign policy deals and wins, and he knows that Americans want to end wars, and so he's trying to, wrap things up in Afghanistan or something like talking about drawing down soldiers in Iraq, and then he does something like this. And so, do we have any idea? I guess, the official explanation as to why Trump made this decision is to counter Russia and Syria. But, what advisors are advising him to do this are, how he goes from we're withdrawing 3,000 troops from Iraq to, oh, yeah, we're adding 100 in Syria.
Yeah, he does seem to be trying to walk this like tightrope with his like campaigning, where he wants to be able to sell his like, all the successes. To him, a success is like a deal or like, successfully withdrawing troops or something from Afghanistan from some quagmire. But then he also has this other idea on the other end that like, you also have to like talk tough and do all this tough, tough guy stuff and like really show other countries, like show our adversaries like China and Russia and stuff that we mean business. And like Iran and all that, So I think that's sort of, this falls into that category of that second type of like campaign move where he's like trying to show that, hey, we mean business and, we'll act tough if we need to. Because that is something he's been, he's come under fire for, obviously for, I think, a ridiculous reason that he's been too like, too easy on Russia or something. Like that's absurd if you look at his actual policies, things like this, these types of deployments, the sanctions that he's imposed, like clearly he's not just given Vladimir Putin a free pass or something. But I think he is trying to combat that perception a little bit because people are claiming that all the time about him. And so I think this move could, kind of fit that bill that he's trying to, combat the perception that he's too easy on Putin.
Right. Well, they're certainly making a lot of room out of this story, even if it doesn't end up being much. Just the kind of way they ran it as an expose and everything. It seems like they're trying to get a lot of headlines here. Do you have anything else to add on Syria, Will?
No, I would just suggest people if they want to see the maps and stuff, you can go to southfront.org. They have a lot of, they have these maps.
All right. So the first Iran story I have up here, I think we have quite a few for today's show, is just one I came across before I recorded that talked about something that me and Will had already covered on the show, which is J-Post, which is I would say a publication that's very sympathetic to the Israeli government, says that they have confirmed, or they use validated, Israel's role in carrying out an attack against the Natanz facility, which is where Iran enriches some of its nuclear weapons, and then they carried out some physical sabotage. And so the major detail was it wasn't a cyber attack, but a physical attack. And I just want to, I'll link to the episode in the show notes page of Foreign Policy Focus where me and Will discuss this story, but I thought it was a pretty interesting update. Will, I don't know if you have anything on this one or if we should get into the sanctions now.
No, I actually hadn't seen this one. That looks fascinating. I got to read this.
Yeah, Dave DeCamp wrote it up at antiwar.com, so I'll throw that link in the show notes page. But yeah, just right before I came on, I came across that. I was like, oh, this is an update of a story we already had covered. I also have here a couple stories where Donald Trump is going to apparently sign an executive order to enforce the global arms embargo against Iran. This is something that we again have talked about on the show, that there's this arms embargo against Iran that was passed in 2007 by the UN that prevented any countries from selling weapons to the Iranians. Well, now that is set to expire by the rules of the JCPOA, which the Iranians have abided by. And so the UN is prepared to lift the arms embargo. But the Trump administration played their hand really poorly with the JCPOA and now says that the arms embargo has been extended, even though the UN and even U.S. allies, the UK, France, and Germany, I'll say that, the arms embargo is an incident. The U.S. says that it is. And this to me is like one of the more Trumpian stories. This is kind of the thing that when he was running for president, you actually heard like liberals talking about is that, oh, he's just going to be a bully in diplomacy. Well, this is like bullying the entire UN with diplomacy by saying that, yeah, we're not going to listen to what the UNSC says. We're just going to go about our own thing and extend this arms embargo. Did it come across that brazen and just crazy to you?
Yeah, man. I think it's even worse too. I think they're even saying that all of the snapback sanctions as of Saturday, I think they're claiming that they're now back in force along with this arms embargo. So like they're really going, far with this. I mean, there is sort of a distinction because at least with the arms embargo, there was a vote in the UN Security Council and it got completely shot down. So it's funny now that they're just turning around saying, "Nah, like actually the arms embargo will be extended, like regardless of the vote." So that's real outrageous. With the sanctions, though, the U.S. tried to bring that to the Security Council, and they just refused to even bring that to a vote. There was just such a unanimous opposition to it that like they didn't even bother voting on it. So I guess the U.S. has a little bit better of a case that like, hey, like they didn't even hold a vote on it, and like we're saying that the sanctions are back in force. But that is what they're arguing, that as of Saturday, that like the arms embargo and the sanctions are all now, what they call the so-called snapback sanctions are now reimposed on the Iranians. And these are pretty serious sanctions, I think, too. Like if they were to be like enforced and if Iran were to try to comply with them, I think they actually ban them from doing most things with uranium enrichment. Like, so that would mostly shut down their entire nuclear energy program were they to comply with it. However, the thing is, though, like I'm saying, all like most of the UN Security Council and all of the other parties to the Iran nuclear deal, the UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China, they're all just saying that like no, like the U.S. has no legal standing in this, and that they can't bring back this arms embargo, that they can't extend it, and that they cannot just unilaterally invoke the snapback sanctions. So try as the U.S. will and claim as they will that like these things are back in force, like it kind of in practice won't be unless they can get the rest of the world to go along with it. And so far, it looks like most of the UN Security Council, like 13 out of 15 members, as well as all the other parties to the Iran deal, they're not going along with this. So it's kind of interesting to see like how the U.S. will proceed here. Again, like the reality of the situation, like I don't know, in practice, the sanctions will not be enforced if the rest of the world is not enforcing them. So the U.S. could like threaten to punish other countries with sanctions. That's what the Trump administration's already said he's going to do that with the arms embargo. They're going to sign an executive order that will let him sanction third countries. But honestly, I can't see the U.S. like sanctioning the UK, France, and Germany for not complying with these sanctions. They might do that to Russia and China, but like not to the Europe 3, the E3 they call them. I can't really see that happening. So there's only so much arm twisting the U.S. can do here.
Right. So, I just had a couple thoughts on it. One was that my first thought too was that, yeah, we're not going to sanction the UK, but how much, I guess, are maybe UK banks or companies going to worry about facilitating any kind of trade to the Iranians, worry about running afoul of US sanctions? Let's say, you have a company, you're trying to get some, PPE or ventilators into Iran or something like that. And you're the bank that facilitates that transaction to make that happen. Well, now if those become dual use items or something like that, and you get sanctioned by the U.S., that's devastating to business. So maybe it's not going to actually change the behavior of a country's government, but I wonder how much is going to change the behavior of independent business. So I don't know if you have anything on that, Will.
No, I think we mostly hit on that. It's just it is outrageous how the U.S. claims to have legal standing here. We've been out of the deal for like 2 years now. They unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA, but the U.S. is just now trying to like invoke this tricky legal argument that like no, technically under the UN resolution, like our name's still on that. So like they're saying technically we're still a party to that, but the rest of the world is not really buying that. So that's I think really what matters here.
Yeah, and then just before I moved on, I want to take 1 second to explain that while there were like provisions in the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, that said, Iran wasn't supposed to enrich uranium up to, I think, above like 3 point something percent, and they weren't supposed to hold a certain amount of like in weight of enriched uranium. However, the deal specified that, let's say, the US, the UK, France, Germany, whoever decided that they didn't want to be in the deal anymore and reimpose sanctions on Iran, Iran would then be able to back away from some of those different things that they were willing to give up. And so that's what's happened. The Iranians have acted within the deal. And for the most part, even our European allies have reflected this by, their votes and stuff like that. At one time, remember, they were, there was at least a report that Trump was willing to sanction their auto industry over them not pressing snapback sanctions against the Iranians at the UN and stuff like that. So
Right.
Trump has been very serious about this. And I imagine that this is not going to go well for him, but that we'll be talking about it again in the coming weeks.
Yeah, thank you for laying out that context. That is important.
All right, well, we got to take a quick break here. We have a sponsor on the show. So I have done a lot of podcasts, Will, and over the years I've gotten a couple offers for sponsors before. However, I've never had an offer from a sponsor for a product that I would actually use. That changed when Carlos hit me up and said, "Hey, man, I really love the show. I like what you're doing." And I had this company where I sell CBD products. And so they have creams, extracts, soft gels, gummies, all kinds of great stuff. Carlos sent me and Will a little sample package each. I'm really enjoying it. As I mentioned, I've been moving and I would expect to have a lot more soreness than I do right now. So I definitely could say that for reduction in inflammation, stuff like that, back pain, I'm enjoying my CBD products. I really like Carlos and his website, Palamo Verde, because he has things on the homepage like the CBD lab results. So, I've tried CBD products in the past, but, you buy them at some, random store where they say there's 75 milligrams of CBD in there, but do you really know? With Carlos's products, you absolutely do, because they have the lab results on the website, and you could get a discount on your order at Palamo Verde if you type the code PEACE, PEACE, in as a promo code when you check out. You do have to spend $75 to get that discount, but it's a 25% discount. And any first-time shoppers will get an additional 10% off for 35% off total. Will, I know you've had about a week now to try your CBD. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, if people out there had tried CBD before, if you bought it at a gas station or a head shop or something, and it didn't really do much, it really does make the difference to get quality products. If you're buying like you mentioned, you can't trust the dosages and all that kind of stuff. Whereas with this stuff from Paloma Verde, you really it does make the difference. The quality makes the difference. You know this about me, Kyle, just in terms of my struggle to sleep at night and to and soft gels have been really helpful in helping me just to wind down at night. But it's not just for nighttime though. They have all kinds of stuff you can take all throughout the day. They've got fruit gummies you can eat. They got liquid extracts. They have salves and creams that you can rub into sore muscles. All kinds of things for different circumstances and different ailments and issues. So definitely check out their website, palomaverdestore.com. That's a PALOMAVERDE store.com. And like Kyle said, use the promo code PEACE to get 25% off your order.
All right, and let's get back into the show. All right, well, the next story we have is definitely some more bad news. The U.S. hopes to name Qatar as a major non-NATO ally, official says. So there's kind of a couple pieces to this story to explain. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently met with a high-ranking Qatari official, the foreign minister, and they talked. And then after that, a U.S. official said that the U.S. was looking to make Qatar a major non-NATO ally. The major non-NATO ally status, I think, is a legal definition, or at least something that the executive uses as a definition for a country to say, hey, you're a special and you get advanced U.S. weapons. So, rather than selling the Qataris the F-15, the F-16, now we'll sell them the F-35. and that's just one example of the potential of becoming a major non-NATO ally. Also, I'm sure there's all kinds of different defense, things. We'll help you out if the Iranians attack or something like that. Will, what are you thinking of this?
Yeah, as far as I understand too, it is like the major benefit of getting this designation is that you get greater access to American military hardware. And there's other defense cooperation stuff too, like joint training, joint exercises, things like that. So I think that's like the major significance really is the joint cooperation and weapons deals and stuff. But it's kind of interesting to note that this is happening just after these other two major deals with two of Qatar's neighbors, these other two Arab states, the UAE and Bahrain, that they've just signed normalization deals with the Israelis. So I'm like kind of curious if this has any kind of any kind of prelude for something like that. The Qatar says that like they won't recognize Israel. That's like their latest position on this. That like they think normalizing is not the way forward. But like I'm just kind of wondering if this is maybe a first step toward them doing that. That like maybe getting this designation of being a major ally is one of their conditions for for coming to some kind of deal. I'm totally speculating, but I am just wondering if maybe this does kind of foreshadow something bigger coming in the works. I mean, we've had Trump saying that like other countries in the region are also going to follow suit of the UAE and Bahrain, and I think he was kind of suggesting Saudi, but like I don't know, like maybe he knows something we don't in terms of like negotiations going on behind the scenes with Qatar or something. It's also very possible he was just kind of like bragging and talking out of his behind, but as he often does with things like this. But again, it's just sort of something that made me curious. I mean, the U.S. does have sort of like some like existing cooperation with the Qataris. Like there's the Al Udeid Air Base, which is I don't think it's technically our air base, but it is like we have a major presence there. It's basically like the CENTCOM headquarters. So like there is a lot of cooperation that already exists between our two countries. So it's not too unlikely, I guess, or too surprising that they would want to take it further with this designation.
So the interesting thing for me was that the Qatar is still in the middle of this kind of diplomatic dispute that's turned to economic war with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE. Although I've heard the UAE have softened a little bit in recent years on this, but really since very close to the beginning of the Trump administration, Saudi Arabia and these other Arab states cut relations with the Qataris, and at one point the Saudis were discussing turning Qatar from a peninsula off the Arabian Peninsula, like a little extra one, into just its own island. They were really going to talking about building a giant trench that way you could cut Qatar off the Arabian Peninsula. And so you have to wonder, like, if maybe this is the Qataris in some way trying to buy some favor with the U.S. to make sure that the Bahrainians or the Emiratis like don't get too many steps ahead of them as far as U.S. weapons goes. So yeah, I was wondering how much of it is just about these intra-Arab tensions, and I guess it's kind of funny because what if this like actually undermines the U.S. goal of like fomenting a more strategic alliance against the Iranians or something like that. So I'm not quite sure how well thought out this policy is, and you would think that it would have to come along with the normalization of GCC relations even before you focus on Israel. But I'm not sure if that's going to happen. So this could just be another one of those Trump era stories that sounds fantastical and nothing comes of it. But if it does happen, expect major weapon sales coming to Qatar soon.
Yeah. I think like from Trump's perspective on this, like just like the what they call the optics or something. Like I think he's just trying to sell as many like deals and things like this as he possibly can, especially in this region. He really wants to be seen as like the Middle East deal maker guy who's like helped to reshuffle all these things. And so I think the stuff with the UAE and Bahrain and as well as this, I think he's just going to try to it's all the part of the same sort of like campaign move.
Well, with that, can I just take a quick second to rant? I can't tell you how many libertarians I've seen in the past couple of weeks that claim Trump is bringing peace to the Middle East. Listen, just because, Bahrain is an island full of Arabs, and the Emiratis are, they're the United Arab Emirates. What sounds, more Muslim than that? They don't hate the Jews for that reason. That's not like It's not like been sitting there sharpening their knives the whole time, and Trump taught them out of going and killing every last Jew. That's not anywhere near what was happening. These countries all had military security, economic ties prior to this. Trump isn't bringing peace to the Middle East. In fact, what he's doing is selling more weapons, which is bringing more chaos and destruction.
Right. I mean, if anything, too, I mean, like what the Palestinians are arguing too is that these deals like take pressure off the Israelis to make nice with the Palestinians. So that also has that effect.
Right. Well, let's move on to one that you actually wrote up over at RT. Russia demands answers from Washington on whether the U.S. is facilitating terrorist attacks in Crimea. So, what happened here? It sounds like almost in your story, the Trump administration outed the fact that they were going after Russian soldiers in Ukraine. What's the story?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I had read this NBC story a couple times. This is the same story where General Frank McKenzie says that there's no evidence to support the whole New York Times Russian bounty story. We covered it on the show recently. But there's this one throwaway line in there that I had not noticed when the first couple times that I read it, and it's citing an anonymous official who's saying that like the intelligence community had thought the bounty story might have some merit because they said that they assumed that it was simply Russia's, quote, proportional response to the U.S. arming of Ukrainian units fighting Russian forces in Crimea, end quote. And like, wait, what? Like, I don't know. I don't think there's a whole lot of open fighting going on in Crimea right now. So it's like, is this guy saying that the U.S. is arming like insurgents to covertly carry out attacks on Russian troops in Crimea? Like, I don't know, Kyle, maybe you had heard of this before, but like, I did not realize that was happening. I had not heard of that. Obviously, I knew that like the U.S. government was giving arms to the Ukrainian government, but specifically arming like units and fighters in Crimea to carry out attacks on Russian soldiers, like I had not heard about that. And so it's kind of funny that in just this throwaway line in this NBC story, they just like, they come out and admit this basically. It was a nameless official, so it's not like it was anyone on record. And they don't really elaborate either. They mention it once and then just drop it. They skip forward to other subjects. But the Russians definitely noticed it because the Russian embassy here in the U.S. called on the White House to they pointed this out and said, hey, are you like arming? They called them terrorists, but like, are you arming terrorists in Crimea to launch covert attacks on Russian troops? Obviously Russia considers Crimea its own territory. They annexed it in 2014. And there was, of course, like a status referendum that like overwhelmingly voted to rejoin Russia. Crimea had previously been a Russian territory, but like early on in the Soviet Union, it was handed over to the Ukrainians. But they voted to leave and rejoin the Russians. And of course, a lot of people have questioned the legitimacy of that referendum. But like Pew and Gallup and a bunch of other Western polling firms did go to Crimea, and they basically like confirmed the results of that status referendum. So, that's why there are, this is now considered Russian territory, and there would be Russian troops there for the U.S. to launch attacks on, apparently. And so far, I don't think there's been any response from the U.S. to the Russian embassy saying like, hey, can you explain this? But, I do think this is fascinating. I didn't find much else reporting on the subject either. I was trying to look for like other stuff on covert operations or arming fighters in Crimea. Couldn't really find much, but that's definitely something I'd like to look into and return to if we can find some more on it.
Yeah, so I actually was, when I read this, I looked around just to see if the U.S. clarified, because my initial thought was, oh, this must be some know-nothing official kind of just talking and meant to say, like, Donbass, or didn't realize that there were, like, that Crimea didn't represent all of rebel-held Ukraine. But it seems pretty clear that the U.S. would have just like clarified that to Russia and probably publicly, just kind of clear there that no, we're supporting the fighters in the Donbass, which everybody knows about. And in fact, Trump was, almost impeached. Well, he was impeached over the fact that, he maybe held up a little bit of that aid. The other thing I want to mention is how provocative this is, if it's true. Or even if it's not. I mean, I could only imagine what would happen if some Russian official, if, Russian media quotes a senior Russian official saying that Russia is sponsoring separatists or insurgents or freedom fighters, or however they want to phrase it, in like Hawaii or even Puerto Rico. People would lose their mind. Crimea is now Russian proper. So that, it's like saying Russia sponsoring terrorist attacks in Hawaii. That's That's definitely how the American media would interpret it, and there would be a heavy demand for Trump to do something. And so, just that this really doesn't get picked up on, isn't discussed, is very concerning for me.
Yeah, it's an incredible kind of like just a admission that you can read in NBC all of a sudden, but then like yeah, they never they drop it. They mention it once, then never return to it. It's just like wait, what? Elaborate, please.
Right? Yeah. This is the kind of story too where you think, yeah, if you have like a more competent media, somebody is definitely like getting in on this, and they're asking questions to Trump administration officials. I mean, I guess it's great that you wrote it up, Will, but you're not a White House correspondent. You can't go to the White House and say, to the press secretary, whoever, can you please explain this statement? And are we really arming terrorists in Russia or supporting terrorists in Russia? That sounds absolutely insane. And, but I doubt anybody in the White House press pool is going to ask that question.
Most certainly not. Yeah.
All right. So last up today, Will, is this, ongoing story that we keep talking about. And that is, what the hell is the Trump administration doing with the New START treaty negotiations? So we are within, I think, 6 months now of this treaty becoming defunct. The New START treaty is the last remaining major arms control agreement and nuclear arms control agreement between the U.S. and Russia. It caps the number of nuclear weapons. It caps the number of deployed nuclear weapons, and it instills a pretty important verification regime and different like abilities to go in. So the U.S. knows what Russia is doing with their nukes, and the Russia knows what the U.S. is doing with their nukes. It made sure that we understand the capabilities of the other countries and could maintain a parity. But I think oftentimes debunk the more hyper claims and hawkish claims from, people within the US. I'm sure it happens in Russia, claiming that, oh, Russia's building a big new weapon, so we have to spend $1 trillion on new nuclear stuff. This is an incredibly important deal. And rather than either, negotiating to expand it or at least agreeing to just right on extended, Moscow has offered to extend it for 5 years, just flat. The Trump administration has played this game. Oh, you have to include China. Look, including China would be like saying including the UK. They have similar nuclear arsenals. And if, that was a demand of Russia, the U.S. would laugh at it, and rightly so. So that was one piece of it. And now it looks like their demands have changed a little bit, Will. What do you think from the new statements from the Trump administration? Does it sound like we will be able to extend New START?
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to look, it's looking increasingly unlikely. I had a brief period there where I was thinking that like maybe they were going to buck up and wisen up on this a little bit, because they were dropping that precondition that like, China would be forced into any renegotiation and extension of New START. Because that's what the U.S. was saying for a while, that the Russians had to somehow convince the Chinese to join it. And the Russians are just like, we can't convince them. They're their own country. Like, they're their own people. We can't just like make them join the deal. And China has very little interest in joining the New START deal with those kind of restrictions, because, like you said, their arsenal is so much smaller than the U.S.'s or Russia's. So I was sort of optimistic for a little while, but now we have the top arms control envoy for the Trump administration, Marshall Billingsley, coming to CNN, giving this interview where he's kind of like reneging on that. He's reintroducing that precondition, where he's saying that Russia now has to pressure the Chinese to agree to talk for a separate arms control agreement. Because that, like, when they had dropped the original China demand, they had said that, like, oh no, we'll negotiate a separate deal with them. Then we won't force them into New START. But now Billingsley is saying that like Russia should now also be pressuring China to do that separate deal. So it's kind of just the same thing, that like they're putting that demand back on the Chinese. Another thing, though, that they're trying to like rewrite the verification mechanism in the New START treaty to like make it stricter. So like, they're going to make the weapons inspections stricter and change some of the protocols for that. And they're calling on the Russians to agree to what they're calling a political agreement, where they're going to commit to that before they start any extension of New START. And the Russians are not super keen on that. Like you said, they've been saying like, we're ready to start negotiating without preconditions. That like we're not going to impose any additional new demands on the treaty. We just think this is an important treaty to renegotiate and extend. And the US's position has not been the same on that, where they're trying to find all these ways to like, introduce preconditions and demands and things to make Russia concede to before we even start to renegotiate what is basically the most important treaty in force on planet Earth right now. It's like the last major restriction on the two largest nuclear arsenals on the planet. So like we're really playing with fire here, and it's unfortunate the Trump administration is being so political with this. One last thing I'll say, actually, Billingsley, the arms control envoy, he actually said that the U.S. demands will get steeper on Russia if Russia waits until after the election to extend the deal. Of course, assuming Trump wins, they'll make the demands steeper. So they really are playing games with New START right now. They're suggesting that like if Russia waits until after the election, they'll start including other bad Russian behavior around the world into the deal, as if like that's going to be they're going to start including all this unrelated stuff. And so again, it's really unfortunate. They're really risking a lot by playing with New START like this.
Right. And so, I guess one of the things I've really noticed on today's show, Will, is that every single one of these things that we point out are, I think, criticisms of Trump that even the left could understand. That he's not a fair negotiator, internationally. He bats out of deals and then claims he didn't, and just tries to bend the reality and the will to his way to get the deals done that he wants done. And he's acting pretty thuggish and all this, and yet nothing. I never hear anything on any of these issues. No criticisms of Trump because of New START. Hell, Obama passed the JCPOA. His vice president is now the Democrat, nominee, and he's kind of weakly said, "Well, if the Iranians agree to go back, maybe we will too." In which the Iranians may ask for a little bit of something in return, since we've thrown their economy upside down by doing this, but they barely make an issue out of any of this, and it seems like all of it would be just such a huge win. And it just shows how empty that any kind of resistance to Trump is, and that it's just all show. It's so disappointing, especially on an issue like this, where you would think the left would be able to cash in on so many different levels here. There's nuclear weapons and environmental stuff. There's the war issue. There's Trump reckless negotiation. We're trying to make deals. I thought you are the deal negotiator. It seems like all you could do is break them. Like, there's just so many easy lines of attack here. And I don't know if it's disinterest or if it's intentional, but there seems to be no motivation to go after Trump for any of this. And it's so disappointing that, that really, as a libertarian, we should, I guess at, this point be like, a little bit more favorable to the left, and MSNBC is a little bit okay right now because hell, Trump is in power. You would think they would get like, even half of the time they get it right, just based on the fact that we all hate the same person. And it's like, I hate Donald Trump, and you guys hate him for all the wrong reasons. I guarantee you, in the next few weeks, even with, Trump's poor negotiation tactics with New START and with his, aggression, particularly in Syria towards Russia, not to mention the potential that his administration is arming, insurgents or terrorists or whoever the hell in Ukraine, and potentially even in Russia proper in Crimea. Their attack is going to be, he's a Putin puppet. Hey, Trump and Vladimir Putin. That's what they do. They constantly, these memes of Trump and Putin kissing. It's just the most absurd. It's almost less in line with reality than Trump thinking that Iran and the UNSC should abide by America's snapback sanctions, and that the embargo just magically is extending. Because
a lot of magical thinking going on right now.
Right. Yeah. On both sides of the aisle. And then they criticize each other for magical thinking is really the best part of all of it.
Right.
All right. Well, I guess we'll continue to exist on our small island of sanity with the rest of the, normal libertarian crowd. And, we even have our own, brand of unrealistic thinkers, but we'll save
our share
talking about those guys for another day. But we really do appreciate everybody who's tuning in. We've gotten great feedback on the show so far. A good amount of reviews on iTunes and ratings and stuff like that. So if you haven't done that and you're listening to the show, seems like you probably like it. You made it to the end, so go ahead and give a 5-star rating and review. If you're still listening on YouTube, thumbs up or share the show, subscribe to it, all those good things. We also put out clips of the show every episode, so not only is it going to be like the full show, but we'll do a clip of us talking Russian and stuff like that. So if you want to share an individual specific thing, and then maybe last we'll just mention the Twitters.
Yeah. I'm at the Will Porter. Can you find him? There it is. I'm at the Will Porter. You can find Kyle's at Kyle _. And if you want to follow the show, you can do that at con_interest. Find us on Facebook, Conflicts of Interest, the same with YouTube. We would really appreciate if you gave our channel a subscribe. And if you really like what we do, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/conflicts of interest.
All right. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Kyle.